Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, episode number 173 of Let's Go Racing. Tyler Jones, Dominic Conrad here with you as we look back at the weekend that was with a second straight win. Christopher Bell, as he was able to get it done at Circuit of the Americas in Austin, marking his 11th career win and the first time he's gone back-to-back in the NASCAR Cup Series. We'll talk about that and put a bow on Austin. Also, we'll look ahead to this weekend's race at Phoenix International Raceway, a place that Penske has dominated in the fall. But can that translate over to the spring? We'll discuss that. Go over our news and notes, top headlines around the sport, our mailbag before we wrap up and get out of here and call it a day. Dominic Conrad joins me right now. Dominic, I had a great time in Austin. Wish you were there, my friend, but I know you're going to have some fun for me this weekend in Phoenix. I've been saying it the last couple of years. This has become a marquee race of sorts between the site and the venue and the racing that we've seen. And there was questions surrounding the short course and all, but I would say that COTA delivered once again and was a fantastic race. And even with Christopher Bell going back to back, we'll talk plenty about Bell here in a bit. It doesn't feel like it was something where, oh, great, Christopher Bell won again. Like, oh, this guy's about to just dominate the season. I mean, we saw great competitive racing all day long. There's a number of guys that realistically could have won this race.
Oh, certainly so. And I don't think TV really did it justice, Tyler. I mean, and that's a whole other separate topic there. When you look at the Fox broadcast, I'm sure you were outside in those last closing down laps at COTA, but there were some missed opportunities there with the Fox broadcast booth and even some muting possibly of some microphones that had happened because of how missing some of these final passes and some of these shots in the closing laps. But I gotta imagine actually being there, being a part of that energy, seeing Tyler Reddick and William Byron and Christopher Bell use up Kyle Busch the way he did. Tyler, I think, had that race gone green, we'd be talking about a much different story, and Kyle Busch breaking this 2-year winless streak. But I have to say, too, I can only imagine that battle. To see that battle for the race lead in those closing laps was just a spectacle in person. And Kyle Busch racing as hard as he could, and Christopher Bell being as a gentleman as he has been this year.
Oh, yeah, definitely so. And as I'm there, Dom, I made my way down to pit road for about the final 15 laps. And I'm in just by the 54 team's pit box. And they have the Fox broadcast on, and they're showing Samantha Busch on screen. And obviously I can't hear anything, but I can sit there and say to myself, that can't be good. They're already setting Kyle up. That might be the jinx of sorts, for disappointment here down the road, already showing the shots and I couldn't hear anything, but I could tell just by watching on screen that Fox was hoping for this Kyle Busch win and the rebound and, that storyline to play out. You could tell without even words being said that that's exactly what Fox wanted. And then I saw some comments afterwards, and it sounded like the Fox guys were openly rooting for Kyle Busch to get that win and only for Christopher Bell to take that away. Think, too, Dom, that Christopher Bell has led a combined 5 laps in these 2 wins. Kevin Harvick may have retired a couple years ago, but we might have found ourselves the new closer of NASCAR.
When he won those 3 races in 2011, or his first 3 wins of that year, I think he led a combined 9 laps. Martinsville, the Coke 600, and somebody will have to fact check me on where that other first opening win was. But certainly impressive. And weren't you the one that said it last week, Tyler, that these were not throwaway tracks, but tracks that we're not necessarily expecting Christopher Bell to do so well at the beginning of the year? And if he's doing well here, what's this saying for the rest of the regular season?
Right. Because these are, I think Jeff Gluck, I was listening to the teardown the other day, referred to these first 3 races as wild card races, where guys can win at those places, but maybe can't win elsewhere. And for the wild card races to start the year, for Christopher Bell to get not 1 but 2 of them, and now we're heading into tracks where are more his cup of tea. Going to Phoenix, going to Vegas, just to name a few here. This is setting up beautifully for Christopher Bell and Joe Gibbs Racing here. And to think, too, Joe Gibbs Racing, before this year, had not won a single race, Dom, since July of last year. Christopher Bell at New Hampshire, at Loudon there. And for them to start this way, I mean, this is very impressive. And I think you have to, I know it's very early on. We still got 33 races to go, but you have to consider Christopher Bell the championship favorite right now.
Well, you and I talked about it on the show. I said it first and foremost that Christopher Bell would be the 2025 NASCAR Cup Series champion. We got 33 races to go and a whole 9 months of racing left, but he's making the early case. And for looking at the championship odds too, entering Daytona, and who were some of these odds-on favorites were, he opened at 550, plus 550 or 5.5 to 1. After winning at Atlanta, those odds dropped to 500. And then now after winning at COTA, those odds have dropped to 400, which are very early season odds. But nonetheless, Christopher Bell's odds are only going to get shorter and shorter if he continues to race this way. And Tyler, it wouldn't shock me if he goes out and defends his Phoenix race this weekend. He won this race in March, and Las Vegas tends to be his Achilles heel on the 1.5 miles. Who's not saying we're talking Christopher Bell winning 4 races in a row, and the first time that has happened since Kyle Larson in his championship run?
Yeah. Nobody has won 3 straight races in the next-gen car. Christopher Bell has the opportunity to be the first to do so this week at Phoenix. It has been a great run for him. And you think about it, he's just now 30 years old. He's got a great thing going there with Joe Gibbs Racing and, that Toyota team, the way they're running here. I mean, this team, it's the 3rd week of the season. I understand they haven't dominated in their 2 wins, but they haven't needed to. I feel like there's every reason to think they're only going to get better from here. And that's got to scare everybody else, knowing that, hey, Christopher Bell's got 2 wins at a couple of wild card tracks where he only led 5 laps. And this team has really nowhere to go but up.
Certainly. And 2 out of the first 3 races. And I bring up that point too. I'm taking a step back here, but talking about that gentleman's driving we've seen from Christopher Bell. So again, this is baseless on my end and pure speculation, but we revisit that Daytona 500 crash that took him out, Tyler, and you look at how he's racing Denny Hamlin. They're racing side by side going down that backstretch. And the way that he had overcorrected back into the outside retaining wall, it seemed like for a split second, he might have been able to save that car. He cuts left, cuts right. In my opinion, he makes that selfless move to not take himself and his teammate out, because they could have easily spun to the inside and maybe collected the cars, but he tried to save his teammate there and then ends up taking himself out in that wreck. And Ryan Preece ends up getting crashed, and that whole thing happens. But then you fast forward to Sunday, and even Kyle Busch acknowledged that Christopher Bell could have dumped him in many opportunities. And I think, too, last year played into that as well, with Christopher Bell dumping Kyle Busch the way he did in the COTA race last year. But we have seen gentlemen driving these last 2 out of 3 weekends. And I think of selfless driving and showing that you can go win races. You can close out races without having to wreck other people and do it in the most clean possible manner. And we certainly have seen that out of Christopher Bell this year.
Yeah, we have. We certainly have. Let's talk Kyle Busch now. Kyle Busch obviously was leading, had a significant lead before that caution came out, and then Christopher Bell was able to track him down and ultimately get the win. And Kyle Busch still riding the longest winless streak of his career at this point. But I'll say this, Dom, I know it sucks for Kyle Busch, a race that he probably feels like he should have won. Even with the caution coming out, you still might be saying to yourself, Kyle Busch, like, what could I have done more to hold off Christopher Bell? Should I have raced him harder or something, whatever it may be? You still got to be thinking that you should have won that race. But with that said, we typically don't talk about Kyle Busch on road courses. We certainly usually don't talk about RCR at road courses. The fact they showed this much speed and that he had a chance, that he was competitive, I don't want to call it a moral victory, but I think it's got to be a very good sign for him to start off the year to have a chance to win like that. I think that Kyle Busch is setting himself up for a bounce back season. To have a performance like this to go forward from here, it sucks not getting the win, but I think it's a building block for that number 8 team, and I do believe they're going to be back in victory lane sooner than later.
I think we see him get back to victory lane this year. We know NASCAR is a very momentum-based sport, and how can you not have excitement and momentum around that RCR camp, heading out to Phoenix and heading out to Las Vegas, Kyle Busch's home track, and it's weird too. You look back at this point last year, and we're 2, 3 races in, the second race of the year at Atlanta, and Kyle Busch in that photo finished so close. That's how close he got to winning a race in 2024, the closest he got. But he was the points leader leaving Atlanta. It just seemed like the season just took a downward shuffle. But he did something at COTA on Sunday that he hadn't done since 2023, and something that we were notorious for seeing Kyle Busch do multiple times every year throughout the 2010s and his entire time at Joe Gibbs Racing, and that is leading the most laps in a cup race. Now, that's a stat that gets overlooked, but Tyler, he's done that 77 times in his career. But that was the first time in nearly 2 years that we saw Kyle Busch go out and dominate a race and lead the most laps. The last time he did it was his Gateway win in 2023. So certainly Kyle Busch looked very strong. He's won on road courses before, but to have that kind of dominance, the leadership with Randall Burnett, we remember how good they were with Tyler Reddick on those road courses in 2022, 2023. So we know that Kyle Busch can get it done.
Yeah, we certainly do. And I think he's going to get back to victory lane pretty soon and get in the playoff when it's all said and done. Let's talk Hendrick Motorsports for a moment. Let's start with William Byron. He obviously finished second. He won the Daytona 500, of course, and had a strong showing here. Nice push late. Had a chance to potentially win this. If we would have gone to overtime, we may have been talking about a different winner here. And the conversation may have been William Byron wins 2 of the first 3 races of the year. And obviously he had, just came out of nowhere to win the 500, finishes second in this race. And the speed they're showing, doing it at different tracks, at wild card tracks here, I think that Christopher Bell looks like the favorite to win the championship right now. But William Byron, he looks like his biggest threat at the moment.
Oh, certainly. So these two, you got to imagine, at least right now, would probably be 2 of your championship 4 contenders come November at Phoenix, and maybe we get a preview this weekend. But I do want to ask you, Tyler, because again, you were at the track and you would have seen this, and maybe there were things I just didn't catch it. But William Byron's a little closer on that last lap, those last couple of corners. Does he move Christopher Bell aggressively out of the way and take the win for himself and go back to back?
I think if he would have gotten there, he would have tried, but he couldn't get there. And he was all over him. He tried to track him down as much as possible, but he couldn't get there. I don't think William Byron is afraid to be aggressive, but the opportunity just simply didn't present itself for William Byron to have that opportunity. But William Byron off to a good start. We saw him get off to a good start last year as well, and the year before that. So that's not something that is foreign to them. What I wonder with William Byron is that we've seen, Dom, where he gets off to these fast starts where they win these early races, and then we get to the summer months and William Byron fades a bit. It's a good start to the season for William Byron, and I do think he'll get back to victory lane here in the next couple of weeks. But that's where I wonder is I think the goal for the 24 team should be, how can we keep this going?
Certainly. So you don't want that momentum to cool. And we saw this last year. We saw it in 23 and 22, where William Byron will win in that first half of the regular season. And then the back half of it, those last 13 races, about Coca-Cola 600 on, it's a struggle type of run that you see out of the 2014. But it also reminds me, Tyler, there was also a multi-champion that would have similar circumstances play out during his championship runs, and that would be his former teammate and predecessor there of sorts at Hendrick Motorsports in Jimmy Johnson. So you got to imagine there's like an R&D factor to that. And I know NASCAR's tried to curb that over the years by making stage racing and giving it its importance with its points, the playoff points you can earn throughout stages and wins throughout the regular season. So maybe there's not as much of what we would have seen maybe in the mid 2010s, but you got to imagine the team knows they're in the playoffs. They're trying stuff that they could try out in the playoff time. So I would imagine it's going to be the same run of the course thing where we see William Byron maybe win another time or three before we get to the Coke 600 and then fizzle out in the summer. It just seems like it's shaping up already to be like that again.
What I wonder is when we mention these two, Christopher Bell, William Byron, with both of them, of course, winning these first three races here and the speed that they've shown. You know, I like seeing domination, but not too much. Like Jimmy Johnson winning 5 championships in a row was a bit excessive. Just being real with y'all. But if I look back at some of my favorite NASCAR seasons, I think of Kyle Larson winning, what was it, 9 races just a few years ago.
10 races.
10 races, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Martin Truex, what did he win? 7, 8 races in his championship year.
7, yeah.
Mm-hmm. The 2020 year, neither guy won the championship. It ended up being Chase Elliott, who had a great playoff run, but Kevin Harvick and Denny Hamlin were just back and forth. It's just fantastic with how much they went to victory lane between those two. To me, as a consumer, those are some of my favorite seasons. It's just seeing somebody put the hammer down. And I feel like we very well could see that this 2025 campaign ends up being a back and forth between Christopher Bell and William Byron.
I would not be surprised one bit at that. And I got to imagine, too, that you sprinkle in Tyler Reddick in there in some way, shape, or form as well.
Well, let's see him get the victory lane first.
But he's shown strong. He finished second in the 500. He was right there at COTA, finishing third. Ran a decent at Atlanta until he got caught up in some messes. But maybe it plays out like 98, where you had Jeff Gordon and Mark Martin having career years, and Dale Jarrett not too far behind in third. And then there was the rest of the field, where it was the big three before the 2018 big three in Logano.
Also, speaking of Hendrick Motorsports, Alex Bowman and Chase Elliott, they had some rough patches that they went through. Bowman got the penalty, of course. Chase Elliott had his share of issues, and both of them rallied to end up getting good finishes. What a day for both of them. I know Chase Elliott, he used to be the road course merchant. And then once they went to the next-gen car, he hasn't been the same at the road courses, but a nice bounce-back day for him. And Alex Bowman, obviously he got his first road course win at Chicago last year, but prior to that, he wasn't known as much of a road course racer. He was running top 10 for much of the day, gets the penalty, rallies back to finish top 10. What a day for both of those guys to get in the mix after the adversity and the struggles that they went through at a place in COTA that's not necessarily the easiest to pass either.
No, certainly so. And I think too the Chase Elliott one's even more interesting because it's lap 1, turn 1, where he gets turned by Ross Chastain. he's down in the back, and then he climbs his way back to the field throughout the race, and he passes Kyle Busch, I believe, on the white flag lap to finish 4th. And it makes me wonder too, of course, races are going to play out different ways, but that spin doesn't happen. How much of a factor would Chase Elliott have been at the end of that race? Would he have been in the spot maybe Kyle Busch was in, or had a factor like William Byron and Tyler Reddick with a chance to win? Very fascinating too, because he has 6 road course wins, but none of them have come in the next gen vehicle. It's like he has stalled out, where he has raced great, but he was exceptional in that Gen 6 vehicle.
Well, and what if Alex Bowman didn't get the penalty? Then we could be talking about a different story with him. Maybe he's a contender to win.
Well, that's the other thing too. Alex Bowman, I believe, had the best average finish of non-winners or non-past winners at COTA, with multiple top 10, top 5 finishes. And Bowman is a very underrated road course racer. I think we all know he can be really good, even before the street course, where he has shown some strong runs at Sonoma, Watkins Glen, and he might even say Watkins Glen's not his favorite road course, but the results are there. The way that Ford 8 team is able to run is really good. And he almost won the COTA race in 22. He was in that last lap battle with Ross Chastain and AJ Allmendinger as well. So certainly not surprising to see that. But I got to say, of the two, Tyler, I was very impressed with Chase Elliott's rebound. I really think he would have been a factor there had that lap 1 spin not happened.
SVG, he ran really well at the beginning of the race, but that car faded as the day went along. And they got to a point where they take a gamble at the end of the race where he stays out as long as possible. And then when that caution came out, everybody was saying, okay, this might have been the break SVG was hoping for, because he was 15 seconds back when the caution came out and he had the freshest tires. So that looks like an opportunity potentially for SVG to get up there and maybe take the win. Has a bad restart, doesn't get the finish he wants. And I got to say, Dom, I'm a little concerned for SVG at this point in time, and really the other road course ringers as well. The guys like, AJ Allmendinger, Daniel Suarez, some of these others, especially in that college camp here, because you have to think about it. If you're one of these road course specialists, you don't have 26 opportunities to make the playoff. You realistically have 6 opportunities to make the playoff. You got to win one of these road course races to get in. And here's Christopher Bell winning. He was already in the playoff. And now that's just another box checked off that makes it even that much harder for SVG. And Trackhouse, it's been well documented, they've had their share of struggles. They don't look like what they used to. This is a place they should have been strong with SVG and Zelich and Ross Chastain, who's won here before, Daniel Suarez, and a missed opportunity. I feel like that, SVG, it's not his fault. I think the car let him down. He raced the hell out of that thing, and I think there's reason to be concerned at what's going on in Trackhouse right now.
I'd be curious if you had heard anything about this because, and maybe, again, might have missed something here on my end, but they were talking about on the broadcast about how SVG's car could just not fire off on restarts. And it was not once or twice. It seemed like every restart, the two stage
Yes.
breaks, the two cautions for cause, SVG could just not get his car rolling. And it seemed like he had a good short run car because I know early in that first stage, he gets to the front. He leads, I think by lap 10, he's the leader. But outside of that, it seemed like the car just faded after that point. And Kevin Harvick might have made the comment in practice or in qualifying, but how you'll see cars kind of ride different between bumps and things on the track based on like how the rear end of the car might be set up with suspension or shock components. And I'd be curious if there was maybe something amiss on those components.
Yeah, I think that something was off there, clearly, with how the restarts were going. And I don't think it's SVG's fault at all. But Trackhouse, we've heard these rumblings that they're not happy with Chevrolet, that Rick Hendrick, is kind of being blamed for maybe having something to say with that. I think that's more so internet fodder and rumors there. But yeah, I would say that there's reason to be concerned. One guy from that Trackhouse camp that did have a good weekend, Connor Zelich, had the problem there on lap 1, but he obviously dominated the Xfinity race the way that he did, and it was clear as day from the jump that he was going to win that thing. The hype machine for Connor Zelich going into the weekend, I thought the odds were a little bit ridiculous, that the odds makers were trying to make up for the money they lost with SVG won Chicago a couple of weeks ago. But I thought it was a very successful weekend for Connor Zelich all around. We know he can compete on road courses. I expect him to continue to competing at the Cup level as well in these road courses. But now let's see what he can do in an oval. I think that's the next big step for Connor Zelich. If he is going to be this phenom that everybody says that he is, he needs to start running better on ovals at the Xfinity level and take that next step. I think he can do it, but that's obviously the thing he's got to get done next.
That's the next step in his progression, like how we saw with SVG winning 3 Xfinity road course races last year. And the ovals, he had some great runs at times, but you can tell that's definitely not his wheelhouse. You're not expecting SVG to go lead 100 laps at Phoenix, but he's probably going to go lead 50 laps at Watkins Glen. So certainly a lot of these drivers have those strengths and weaknesses. And 18 years old to be one heck of a road course racer, he's going to be a force to be reckoned with for a very long time. But let's see how he runs on these bread and butter cookie cutter racetracks that NASCAR is more often than not visiting on the schedule.
Let's talk about just COTA itself. They go to the short course, and there was a lot of skepticism about going to the short course after running the traditional full-scale track since they began this thing. And I don't know about you, Dom, but a lot of people saying that, hey, this isn't how it's supposed to be. This isn't what F1 does. I don't really care what F1 does.
We're not F1.
It's not Formula One racing out there. I
Yeah.
mean, you think about like what F1 does with their passing zones and how fast they go. It might as well be a different sport than what NASCAR is. You know, like it's not the same. And the product we saw, I thought the racing was just as good, if not better. The fans got more laps. They got to see the cars more often. And like, what did we do? We took away some straightaways in the process. I mean, it was fine. And you got to see more of the action. I went up to turn one at one point, and I could see almost the entire track of all the cars going around because they were running the shorter course. I had no problem whatsoever with this move to the shorter course. And ultimately, I think that it was the right decision. I can understand where some people say, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, because we've seen good racing there the last couple of years. But with that said, I think that they saw something that could be better and they improved it. And I give SMI and COTA credit for making the call that they did to do it.
Sure. And I think who wins at the end of the day? It's the fans, because they got to see 30 more laps of racing. And I think that was the big push too, Tyler. It was the fact that fans would have the opportunity to be able to see race cars more on the track instead of waiting for an extra 2 minutes for the next lap to roll around. You reduce the time of amounts of waiting for that next lap under green flag conditions. You drastically cut the time for cautions. We know road course cautions can be
Yes.
notoriously long. And I imagine being at the track, you probably felt that even more, because you could definitely feel that on the TV experience side of that.
Yeah, you could. You could. And then on top of that, too, you look at this race going forward from here. The contract is up between COTA and SMI for that 5-year deal. And it sounds like it's year to year. There was nothing there advertising season ticket renewals or anything. They didn't put that out there of like guaranteeing they're coming back next year. That all still needs to be worked out. But attendance looked pretty strong. Seemed like a good crowd. The weather was absolutely perfect. It was in the high 70s, low 80s with a slight breeze. It was a great atmosphere. And the people that I've heard from, Dom, when it comes to the future of this race, the teams and the sponsors, they want to be there. And I think that's an important thing. Whether you're talking about sponsors for the race teams or sponsors for the race, that is a young, thriving market, and it is a unique track experience that we don't get anywhere else. And you think about the alternative, okay, let's just say COTA goes off the schedule. Do we really want to run 2 Texas races again? Probably not. Do we want to go to Kentucky? Probably not. Now, maybe there's a trade situation where I know there's some discussions going around of NASCAR going back to the Chicago Speedway, and then maybe SMI takes over a street race like San Diego, what's been rumored, or something like that potentially. Maybe there's a trade deal between NASCAR and SMI to work something out like that. But I think that this race has been a success. The attendance has been good. The sponsors want to be there. It's a young market and it's a growing market. I don't see any reason to leave COTA. I don't think SMI is going to leave COTA either. The only way this doesn't happen is if SMI finds a way to screw this up. Now, they have a reputation of screwing things up. Just ask Denny Hamlin. So it's not beyond impossible that this could fall through. But I think, Dom, that COTA should stay on the schedule for a long time. And I would be surprised if we're not back at COTA next year and beyond.
Yeah, it would make sense to be back. And I remember Bubba Wallace making a comment. It might have even been like on our promo or something years ago, nothing to do with the COTA race. But if it makes dollars, it's got to make dollars to make sense, or something was the quote. And I feel like that's what it's ultimately going to come down to. Is SMI making money? Is COTA making money? Is NASCAR making money? And I figure if you have all three of those things in the formula, there'd be no reason to scrap this race. And I know at this time, And at the time of this taping, there's no deal in place for 2026. But 5 straight years, I think you eliminate the whole bad first impression of 2021 with that bad crash and the rain and all that, because it's made up for great racing. It's been great with attendance every year. Fans love it. It seems like it's become an instant classic.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. One more note on COTA before we move on to Phoenix. Dom, another week. Another week we're talking about officiating in NASCAR. This time not at the end of the race. We're not talking about when the caution was thrown out, but the infamous right hook is back in the conversation once again.
So are we talking the whole turn 6 issue, or what are we talking here? Fill me in.
The infamous right hook that happened that could lead to a suspension here.
Well, yes, I mean, NASCAR made it very clear at the beginning of the year that they were not going to tolerate that. If you're suspended for intentionally wrecking a driver, that they would suspend you and you'd be stripped of your playoff point. There's hefty penalties. They're telling you don't do it. So they don't want to have to enforce that rule.
Right. And we saw that this past weekend. Remind me, who was that that pulled off the right hook again?
Man, I'm having a hard time drawing the conclusion on that one, to be honest with you.
Look this up for me. I can't remember the names off the top of my head here, but we did have another right hook situation. And NASCAR, has been very serious about these right hooks, that they don't want drivers doing it, leads to suspension. This one wasn't as egregious as what we've seen in the past, at least the end result of it. But now we're going to find out, is NASCAR going to stick with that? And then you mentioned the turn 6 thing of guys, cut the line, and they weren't always calling it either. Like, again, and there was miscommunication. Like, what's all of this going to be? Like, I feel like it's almost a new thing every week when we talk about this officiating. I'm curious, are they going to hand down the suspension for the right hook? And then, like, the turn 6 thing again, like, my goodness, like, can we have, that's all I'm asking for, is consistency here.
So I'm going to source here. I'm glad you filled me in, because I had missed this. And like I said, I will never BS on anything if I don't know. I truly didn't know what you were talking about till now. And this is an article from Sports COTA. They're talking about how Austin Cindric and Ty Dillon had an incident on lap 4 where it appeared, and this is Sports COTA's reporting, Cindric appeared to have right hooked Ty Dillon on the front stretch on lap 4. And I knew Ty Dillon had some issues. I didn't realize it might have actually stemmed from this. So I missed this, but drivers were weighing in on it. And Dale Earnhardt Jr. even said on his Dale Jr. download, he hopes NASCAR doesn't come down too hard on him for it. But yeah, that's what we're talking about here. And if NASCAR does, and at the time of the taping, we don't know. No ruling has been made just yet. But if something does come out, this would strip him of playoff points. This would give him at least a 1-race suspension. You got to imagine, I'm sure Austin Cindric probably wasn't sleeping good Tuesday night about this.
Yeah, and based on the rule, you don't get any playoff points for the rest of the regular season. You have to enter the playoffs with no playoff points. So will NASCAR come down? We'll see. You mentioned the turn 6 thing of guys, cutting through it, and NASCAR not really doing anything about it when they said one thing and they do another here. I just don't understand that, because everything's computerized. We have cameras everywhere. How are we missing these things?
I think it just goes back to the human element. Maybe not everything is completely policed, and you want to still have some of that human factor. Like right as a football analogy here, Tyler, I've heard Chris Collinsworth say this on broadcast before with Sunday Night Football, that there is technically holding on every play, but it's a matter if it is called or how the official perceives it. So I imagine maybe gray area, and maybe something that was overlooked here with the turn 6 thing at COTA, but I got to imagine it's that human element coming into play with it, where you're not going to catch everything.
Yeah, but I mean, like I said, we have computer scoring for everything. We don't have computers in the NFL for those type of things. You shouldn't miss that. I was a little frustrated with that as far as that goes.
Sure.
Looking ahead to Phoenix this weekend, Dom, as we begin the West Coast swing. We will be back there for the championship later this year. Penske has dominated the fall race, but it has been a different story when it comes to the spring race at Phoenix. I think people get this idea, Dom, as of late, like Phoenix, oh, great, here's Penske again. It'll be one of those three cars. But the spring race, historically speaking, has not been their strength.
No, it hasn't. And this is where you tend to see good runs by a William Byron and a Tyler Reddick. It seems Kyle Larson, Denny Hamlin are going to be your front runners on Sunday. We'll get more on that here in the odds in a minute, but got to imagine the spring race, the fall race, maybe not necessarily the strong suit of Penske in the spring as it is in the fall, like we've clearly seen the last 3 years. But you look at the race week, and I got to imagine how you look at that final ticker and how it all comes down to that top five, top 10. It's probably going to be a Christopher Bell running up front, a William Byron, a Kyle Larson, and maybe not necessarily a Team Penske Ford, maybe a Ryan Blaney, maybe not. But it seems like the Team Penske cars have that track dialed in when they come back in November and not necessarily in the March time, late winter, early spring race, early on in the year.
The track obviously changed a lot a few years ago with the repave. You got the dog leg, of course. Dom, are you a fan of the dog leg or not? I actually don't hate it. I like the dog leg. I like seeing how wide that track can get for being a short track. Some people aren't a fan of it. What do you think about the racing and the dog leg element and everything there at Phoenix?
Yeah, I'm a fan of it. You don't have a lot of that grassy area like you did with the old layout there in the new dog leg and the new front stretch. And you get to see the cars fan out 4 and 5 wide. And sure, there's been some crashes over the years with that. The truck race, I think, was probably the worst example of that in 2023 and that championship race. But nonetheless, the restarts are definitely very exciting. And I've always found it fascinating, maybe a lesser detail here, but one of those that's always intrigued me. Usually you'll see the pace car pull off and then the cars are going racing right away. Sonoma, the pace car pulls off there as they pull off to the hairpin, and you get a few seconds. But Tyler, these guys are going and they're policing themselves for half a lap because the pace car, by the time they're going green the next time by, is already pulled off outside of turn two, and they are driving the entire back stretch all no, they're having to police themselves is the way to put that because there's no pace car there to pull off safely in turns 3 and 4 because it's all that inside retaining wall. So I do find that fascinating. There's just those little intricate things about Phoenix Raceway. I think that's certainly always been an intriguing one to me in this new layout.
Yeah, it is for sure on that front. I think you're absolutely right about that. I wonder this with this being where the championship is at, and it's still early in the season. This is the fourth race of 2025. Do you think there's going to be some experimenting going on? Do you think teams are going to take some chances or try some things that they normally wouldn't and get a feel for this fall race? Or kind of what we mentioned with Penske, like, hey, they don't have much success in the spring, but they dominate in the fall. Is it too far out in the distance? Is that race too different from this one to even think about experimenting a bit?
They may tell you one thing and do another. We'll never know really, truly, I think, unless you're on the inside with one of those teams. But I do think your playbook's a lot more open if you're a Christopher Bell, a William Byron, one of the two guys that are locked into the playoffs if we have like no 17 winners. But we got to imagine those two are going to make it in. So if you're the rest of the field, maybe you do take that gamble. Maybe you don't. If you use it as a throwaway race of sorts. But I think you're more likely to see something from William Byron and Christopher Bell. I got to say, Tyler, if we see Christopher Bell and William Byron doing an R&D type of weekend, and they're running 25th to 30th on the racetrack at tracks that they usually do pretty well, you got to imagine they're doing something in preparation for that November race.
You've been to Phoenix many times. I've not been to this racetrack. This is kind of like your de facto home track of sorts
Yes.
there where you're at. For folks that don't know, what would you tell them about Phoenix Raceway and what stands out about the race weekend experience there?
I think for me, it'll always be my favorite because that was the first race I went to as a fan. My mom and dad taking me as a high school kid with my brother and getting to do that a few times. And the first race I got to work as a member of the media covering the race weekend in 14. So I think for me, it's a very nostalgic and sentimental place. But even just driving down Avondale Boulevard and you get past the bridge where the river is and you see the track in the distance, you see the grandstands and that iconic little mountainside where they show on TV where the racetrack is in Rattlesnake Hill. Just the scenery is pretty cool. It's definitely something out of the Southwest because it is. And I think it reminds me a lot of New Mexico because that's where I'm from and the geography would be very similar. But I think in and around the track, there's a lot of cool places to eat. There's a lot of cool sightseeing. So not just at the track, but it is a cool little area and environment to be around. And then the track itself has been seen a lot of renovations over the years, from how they redid the backstretch to the front stretch to looking at the new buildings. I mean, there's a big Rudy's like tent setup where they bring drivers in. And I want to say too, the championship winner makes an appearance at that Rudy's location that's on the racetrack, trackside, I should say. So really cool things. There's a lot of different stuff set up. There's shops. There's a lot of tents too, or at least in the years past, where you could have merchandise off property of the Circle K right there by the track. So there's certainly a lot going on for the NASCAR race weekend, and the fans do come out of the desert to come to the NASCAR race weekend. I'll tell you, Tyler, there's a lot of fans. That race usually sells out, and there's no shortage of people coming from all corners of the country to Phoenix. It's a great place, and I hope you get the chance to experience it someday.
And I've been told that it's one of the nicest tracks on the circuit when it comes to the facilities and everything around it as well, that they do a first class job. That's a big reason why they're hosting the championship race as of right now, which they've done for the last several years to this point. Let's shift gears and get to our news and notes segment and find out what's going on in the sport. Don, what do we got this week?
Well, certainly worth at least bringing up and chatting a few minutes about entering. Speaking of Phoenix this race weekend, we're going to have Katherine Legge attempting her NASCAR Cup Series debut. Katherine Legge will become the first woman since Danica Patrick to race in the Daytona 500 in 2018 to run a NASCAR Cup Series race. So it's been 7 years since we've seen that happen. Katherine will be making her debut with the number 78 Live Fast Motorsports team, BJ McLeod's team, friend of the show, who's been on a couple of times. We did try getting Katherine on this week, just scheduling conflicts and things didn't allow that to happen. But we do look forward to having her at some point on our show. But nonetheless, Tyler, pretty spectacular. Only open car, 37 vehicles, so she will be racing on Sunday. But it'll be a fun follow to watch along, especially with BJ McLeod's team not necessarily entering at the intermediate tracks. And I remember him saying on this show months ago that he wasn't necessarily interested in fielding vehicles for other drivers, but certainly something had to have changed there.
Yeah, I think money talks.
Absolutely.
And Katherine probably had some significant funding with her to make that intriguing, to make that happen. But great for NASCAR to have another female driver in the field, first time in a long time. She's very accomplished, big open wheel background in IndyCar. I'll be honest, I don't know a ton about her. I'm excited to get to learn more about her, but this is great. And more cars in the field, too. We get past Daytona, and we very rarely see the rest of the year 40-car fields. And I know it's not going to be 40, but I think it's great to have more of these open cars and more of these entries. And you know, a female is going to bring attention to the sport like this. You know, I was watching some college basketball the other night on ESPN, and I see on the ticker one of their lead stories is Katherine announcing she's attempting this cup race. And, you know, people complain all the time about ESPN not covering the sport and all that. Well, you want to get some attention. You want to get people talking. This gets people talking, and this draws eyeballs. And, you know, the ratings right now for NASCAR, they're off to a good start to 2025. Daytona 500 had about 7.5, 8 million viewers. You've had over 4 million for these other two races. And you want to bring in a new audience. You want to get people talking. This is a way to do so. And great on BJ for open this up and allow somebody to get in his car and to make this happen here. I think this is great for Live Fast Motorsports, and I'm excited to see how it all plays out.
And I got to match too, Tyler. You've been around the team. You know some of these guys that have worked with Live Fast over the years. What is the realistic expectation? What's a successful race for Katherine on Sunday? What's a successful race for Live Fast Motorsports, in your opinion?
Finishing the race. I think that is something that can be accomplished. And you get out of there. If you're Live Fast Motorsports, obviously you don't have a ton of money. So if you can finish the race with minimal damage and go forward from there. I think you're feeling pretty good about that situation. Just getting Katherine some experience and getting that paycheck and getting some good attention to your team and the sport. And that might turn into more opportunities down the road on that front. So I think that's what would be a successful day as far as I'm concerned.
Sure, certainly. Do you think we see her in more cup races? Is this kind of a test the waters type deal or one and done?
Hard to say because, like I said, I don't know much about her and her interests, is if that's something she wants to do. But if it's a successful day, if she finishes the race and shows speed, it's hard to imagine that it would be just a one-off of that situation. You would think, just human logic, that you would want more of it from that point.
Certainly so. Certainly so. And looking at some of these other NASCAR headlines too, Tyler, I don't think we've talked a lot about throwback paint schemes for Darlington, but one that got announced this week certainly I think will make a lot of people happy, especially since the car number, maybe not the manufacturer, but the car number does align with the number. So Austin Cindric has announced that their team will be throwing it back to Dale Earnhardt Darlington for the Goodyear 400 this upcoming May. So the paint scheme, the library that they have chosen, is going to be a tribute to Dale's 1979 and 1980 Rookie of the Year and Championship campaign when he drove for Rod Osterlund in the number 2 car. So it's got that blue along the side panels, the blue that comes along the hood kind of at a pointed arrow with some yellow, and the same number 2 stylized that you saw with Rod Osterlund's team. So the first throwback, to my knowledge, at least on the Cup side, has been announced here, Tyler. I'm sure we're going to be getting many more of these announcements throughout the week.
I haven't got to see it myself yet, but that sounds intriguing. I love that it's the same number as well. What I would like to see with Throwback Weekend, there's a couple things. One is, can we get more of the same sponsors that sponsored these previous cars in the past? And I know that's a little difficult, obviously, with business deals and trying to figure all that out. But I think that would be cool if we could find a way to make that work.
Certainly so.
And I would also like to see with Throwback Weekend, can we choose like a theme, like an era of some sorts, and everybody sticks with that? Can we have one year be like 70s weekend, or another year be 80s, 90s, 2000s? And can we make it mandatory that everybody's got to do the throwback and they have to do it this era? Because like Joe Gibbs Racing, I don't know why they have not been doing the Throwback Weekend thing and running their cars, and it infuriates me. I remember a few years ago, Jeff Gordon, his final season, he did not run a throwback car. He ran his old Rainbow Warrior scheme a few weeks earlier at Bristol, but he didn't run that with everybody else at Darlington. I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing, Jeff. He's trying to stand out in front of everybody else and, not do his thing at Darlington. I would like to see this a little more organized. I think there can be more order to this.
Because they have talked about doing arrows in the past before, and not everybody sticks with it. You always got to have the people that want to be different, like you said. And I think with the Jeff Gordon one, to be fair to him, I think they had announced that paint scheme well before the beginning of the 2015 season and before a Darlington throwback thing was going to be in the works. So I think that's why the timing didn't work out on that. But it was pretty weird to see that 3M car racing among all the throwbacks at Darlington.
Yes. Yes, it was.
There could have been some adjustments, I think. There were concessions somewhere.
There could have been. But that'll be cool to see for Austin Cindric. Hopefully he's not suspended for that race.
He might be missing this weekend at Phoenix. We'll see if that's going to happen.
Yeah, but then if he appeals and things get pushed back, maybe he's not running that throwback car at Darlington, potentially speaking. What else we got, Dom?
So looking ahead to this weekend at the 2025 Shriners Children's 500, the NASCAR race at Phoenix. Of course, Tyler, we're talking about drivers to watch this weekend, but what are odds makers saying? Who do you think the odds-on favorite is, and what are their opening odds before a lap has been turned on the track?
I'm going to guess the guy that's won back-to-back races, Christopher Bell, is probably the favorite, and I'd put his odds at about 600.
Very close. Very close. You're getting really, really good at predicting these, or you're looking at them before, but I think
I have not looked. I promise. I have not looked.
And I was just going to say, too, I think you're probably just getting really good at predicting them because we do this every week. But Christopher Bell would be your odds-on favorite. The defending winner of this race from last year and the winner of the last 2 Cup Series races at plus 450 or 4.5 to 1. You have Ryan Blaney at plus 550, Kyle Larson at plus 650, William Byron past Phoenix winner as well, plus 850. Chase Elliott at plus 900. Joey Logano, your championship winner in November, and the Phoenix race winner at plus 950. Denny Hamlin, a past Phoenix winner, as well as Chase Briscoe, another past winner. JGR teammates there sharing odds at plus 1,000. Tyler Reddick at plus 1,200. Ross Chastain at plus 1,400, the 2023 Series finale winner. Ty Gibbs, who's never won a Cup race, plus 2,200 alongside Chris Buescher at 2,200 as well. Kyle Busch at plus 2,500. And as you look through some of those long shot odds, Katherine Legge, who's making her debut, is going to be at plus 2,500 to 1.
You mentioned Ty Gibbs. This is his third season in the NASCAR Cup Series. Hasn't won a race yet. And I don't know how many people are paying attention to this, Dom. He is struggling. Like, he is not running up front. He is not getting top tens. We'll get to our picks here in just a moment. But I'm starting to wonder, Dom, is Ty Gibbs a fraud? Is he getting exposed at NASCAR's top level? I know he's still very young, but you see his teammate, Christopher Bell, getting back-to-back race wins. Denny Hamlin had a good season last year. We'll see what happens with Chase Briscoe, but something is off there. And I'm wondering, is Ty Gibbs going to get things going and get to victory lane soon? Or is the pressure going to get turned on at Ty Gibbs? I think that's a thing that not enough people are talking about of his struggles right now.
It's worth a follow because Daytona, he finished 16th on the lead lap. All right. Atlanta, he wrecks out. But at Austin, he qualified 13th, finished 34th. I don't know all the details of what went down on their race day, but to finish, what would that be, like the second to last car on the lead lap? This is a driver who won in his Xfinity Series debut at a road course in 2021. For just 4 years removed from that. And Gibbs is now in his third full-time year in Cup, third and a half year if you count his fill-in time with Kurt Busch's ride at 23:11. And I got to say, Tyler, we talk about some of these drivers that are off to fast starts, like John Hunter Nemechek, who is off to a stellar start, best start of his career. You got to look at the flip side of that. And you look at Ty Gibbs 3 races in, he was inside the playoffs solidly last year. He had 2 top tens. He was 9th in points. Even his rookie year, he was 20th in points. He's 35th in points. So definitely some cause for concern. And I got a one or two, speaking of Chase Briscoe, because you brought his name up. If this will be the race weekend that he finally climbs out of that negative point total that he has because of the penalty. Now, the penalty and the appeal process, that's all happening this week before the taping of the show. But before any of that, he's still in the negative. So he could, in theory, climb out of that this weekend. Maybe he might even springboard past Ty Gibbs while he's at it.
Jimmie Johnson still has more points than Chase Briscoe, and by a lot.
And he has more points than Ty Gibbs.
That too. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Ty Gibbs, it's an interesting conundrum because he's driving for his grandfather, so I can't imagine he has too much pressure on him. But you think about Monster as a sponsor. They're already sponsoring 2 other cars. They can't be too happy right now with what's going on with Ty Gibbs. I believe he only has like somewhere between 5 to 7 top tens in his last 36 races, which isn't very good. I think we need to be talking more about the struggles of Ty Gibbs. If he doesn't turn around soon, I think there's certainly cause for concern. As far as picks go for the weekend, I think Christopher Bell is going to be a very popular choice, Dom. But yeah, I'm going to pick the guy that I think is his biggest threat. And I think we're going to see a back and forth this season between these two. Give me William Byron to win at Phoenix Raceway this week to get back to victory lane and even up the scoreboard 2 apiece between him and Christopher Bell.
I like it. So you're saying the 2023 Spring Phoenix winner is going to be going head-to-head with the 2024 Spring Phoenix race winner. And how it's all going to shape out. I think you're right on both of those points. I think where we differ is who's going to win the race. I think Christopher Bell becomes the first driver in next-gen NASCAR history to win 3 in a row. And I'll even say it right here, Tyler, I think he's going to win 4 in a row when it comes to Vegas. I said he was going to win at COTA. I picked him on the show last week. I'm picking him again this week and sign me to a contract next week to pick him up as well at Vegas.
All right. So you got the John Roberts, Greg Biffle thing going on. I respect it. I respect it. That's good. Let's get to our mailbag segment. We ask you to submit questions to us each and every week. DavidStarPodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're interested in sponsoring this show, want to get involved, you can email us there as well at DavidStarPodcast@gmail.com. By all means, feel free to send us a shout there. If you guys would like to get involved and contact us, we certainly would appreciate it. But let's get to our first email in the inbox this week, and it comes from Clarence. And Clarence wants to know in our mailbag segment this week, with looking at the rest of the season ahead, what races are you guys most looking forward to? Dom, I'll start with you.
Good question, Clarence. I would say the races I'm looking forward to, the ones I'm going to, first and foremost. But even if I'm watching on TV, you always got to look at the super speedway races, the night races. There's something about cars under the lights. I think that's always fun to watch, like a Daytona, Darlington. And we need to bring back more night races, Tyler. I think that's something I think we are missing in the Cup Series. But that's a topic for another day. But outside of that, any kind of super speedway road course race, I'm going to be at the next two races, so I'm looking forward to those. But anytime you have NASCAR on the television on a Saturday or a Sunday, it's a good day in my book. You?
I got to tell you, a lot of people in Austin this weekend were talking about this race, and I'd kind of forgotten about it, or at least went to the back of my mind anyway. I didn't necessarily forget about it. But a lot of talk this week about that Mexico City race.
Ooh, good point.
And obviously that's going to be in June. And you should have a lot of people that attended COTA make the trip down to Mexico City. They are expecting a sellout crowd there. Daniel Suarez making his return. I am very intrigued with that environment, the race that we're going to see, and all the festivities around it. I think that is going to be the event of the summer of sorts for NASCAR, going down to Mexico City and seeing what type of product they put out there. And I was listening to some talk this week just about the teams, and just the organization for this is going to be a little bit of a challenge because they are driving down there. And you think about like the equipment going through customs, driving through the Mexico border, which isn't necessarily the safest. And that's another topic of sorts. There's going to be some logistics and concerns. Dom, when I look ahead to Mexico City, I'm excited about it, but just being real here, I don't think it's going to go perfect. I would expect some hiccups along the way. I don't know exactly what that is. We know Kyle Busch is going to race. He is not going to be taken away by the feds in Mexico. He will be allowed down there, so that's good to see. But I would think that there will be some hiccups, but overall, I'm still excited about it.
Sure, absolutely. And I think what I'm more fascinated by too is the logistics. The fact that there's no off week before or after, because correct me if I'm wrong, Tyler. I think isn't Father's Day weekend that weekend that they're racing in Mexico City? And that typically has been an off weekend in the past. We've run on it, yes, but more often than not, Father's Day weekend, at least in recent NASCAR history, has been an off weekend for the Cup Series. So that's fascinating in itself. But look at where they're going the week before. And look at where they're going the week after. You have Michigan on June 8th and you have Pocono on June 22nd. That's what's fascinating to me is this crisscross across the continent. And you go from racing in the Northeast, or in the North, I should say, and then you drive down to Charlotte. And then through to Mexico City is going to be like a 24-hour drive. And then you got to turn back around, bring the cars back to go to Pocono. I imagine the logistics are probably already figured out, but it reminds me of like when the teams do the West Coast swing. This is a southern swing. You're going through a different country. You got to account for that time that you're going through customs and the back and forth that's going to cause. I am curious how the logistical nightmare is going to be for these teams.
And I would think that some of the smaller teams that don't have the resources of the money and all the cars, Dom, might be in a conundrum where they have to take the same car from Michigan to Mexico City or Mexico City to Pocono and not even make it back to Charlotte. That is a realistic possibility where you could be taking a car built for one of those tracks and you have to bring it to Mexico City or, swap it as the backup, whatever it may be. Like, to me, I think that's going to be a challenge to see how these small teams overcome that.
Well, and to make that an even bigger logistical thing, at least, okay, you have a double header. You have the Xfinity Series running there on Saturday. The Xfinity Series isn't going to Michigan, at least in June. So that at least creates a little bit of a break and a reprieve for the Xfinity teams, but then they're hightailing it the next week to get to Pocono. So I imagine for the Xfinity teams where there's a lot less money floating around in that garage, in the purse, and the race winnings, that Xfinity teams are probably going to be really stretched thin with this crossing of the international border and getting to and from. I imagine that's going to be where you probably have more of your hiccups.
Another question in the inbox comes from Tony. Tony wants to know, guys, what racetracks do you feel should have two races? We don't typically see tracks with two races anymore. Dom, I'll let you start.
Ooh, tracks with two races. I would have said years ago, and my wish got granted. I think selfishly living on the West Coast was Las Vegas, and finally Vegas getting that second date in 2018. But again, if I'm thinking selfishly here, Tyler, maybe Texas Motor Speedway, but we'd probably oversaturating the market with two Texas Motor Speedway dates and a COTA date. So that's not happening. But I would probably think there or Pocono. I thought Pocono was really good with the doubleheader, and I'm sure the drivers liked that Saturday Sunday deal too because that shortened the season up a week and created more of an off season or at least a chance of a break mid-year. So my mind would go there, a track where maybe I'm not necessarily biased towards, but one that could offer up a double like we did see with Michigan or Dover or Pocono in the past, at least during the pandemic. That's where my mind goes. I'm curious where yours is.
So I've been of the belief for a long time that only drafting tracks should have two races because they're the least amount of tracks we go to. So Atlanta, Daytona, Talladega should have two races. But as NASCAR has reinvented this schedule over the last few years, Dom, we've kind of run out of the wish lists of tracks. Like, we sat here for a long time and we said, man, we would love it if NASCAR went to COTA. We would love it if they went to North Wilkesboro, if they went to Bowman Gray. And you start to think with the way they made these changes, man, we'd love to have a street course race. They've made those changes. And there's not a whole lot left on the wish list. Maybe it's a Montreal. Maybe it's return to Auto Club and get to the LA market. Maybe it's a San Diego street race. We made the return to Iowa, first time in the Cup Series. So the wish list is smaller, and I'm more content, Dom, with the schedule now than it's ever been. Now, with that said, you think about who has two dates besides the plate tracks. Vegas does.
Darlington, Martinsville, Bristol.
Bristol.
Do we count Charlotte on this list? Or is it technically
Charlotte technically does, but I like that they run the Roval for their second race, even if it's a glorified parking lot. So you don't see a ton of it. Darlington, they got two races, but I felt like they earned it for what they did in the pandemic to open up themselves when a lot of tracks weren't even willing to host NASCAR, even if it wasn't a crowd, like what they did. And then there's the crowd, Dom, that says, like, hey, we need more races in North Carolina. We need to go to North Wilkesboro for a cup race. We need to go to Rockingham and all this. And, like, we talk about oversaturation and go to multiple tracks. You mentioned with Texas, I think you have to be cautious of being oversaturated in markets. We have two races in Darlington. Martinsville is right there next to North Carolina, realistically speaking. You got two races in Charlotte. And then if we start picking races away from, some of these tracks, like let's say we take away, a race with a track with two races, and then we add it to North Carolina, then you got an oversaturation problem. So I think the schedule is in the best spot it's been in a long time, at least since I've been watching. Is it perfect? Far from it. but I think that we do have a good thing going. I don't think we necessarily need to go to Martinsville twice. I don't think we need to go to Vegas twice. As much as I love Vegas, I don't think we need to go to, some of these other tracks twice. But I don't know what more you could realistically do, because these tracks too, Dom, are owned by NASCAR, are owned by SMI, and they need races at their tracks.
They sure do. And I think maybe a happy medium. We've both been to this track, and it's never had a second date in its time in the NASCAR Cup Series or on the NASCAR schedule. But Homestead Miami Speedway might be another candidate. The more I think about it, would be an interesting mile and a half, because it had that allure of being that final race of the year. The only time they visit was the last race of the year. But if you had Homestead in the spring and in the fall, or as the finale and an April race or some sorts, Miami's a very popular destination. I imagine that would be a very popular move.
Yeah, we'll see how it all plays out. Fun show today, Dom, as always. Make sure to subscribe to Let's Go Racing. New episodes out each and every week. Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. Check us out on social media at Star Podcasts, Facebook. Also, you can email us, davidstarpodcast@gmail.com. Dom, you got a big weekend headed to Phoenix. Where can people follow along for your coverage, and what all are you going to be doing out there, man?
And follow us along at theracingexperts.com. Follow me on X, Instagram at Dominic Aragon. Have a lot of our NASCAR coverage out there with Jonathan Fjeld, our managing editor at the Racing Experts and friend of the show as well. So be a lot of fun to go cover the race weekends with him back-to-back weeks. And should be a lot of fun. It's always a great time at the racetrack, Tyler, and looking forward to seeing a lot of old faces and familiar faces as well.
Yeah, should be great. I'll be watching from home. I got some work to do this weekend, but I'll certainly be keeping tabs and following what you're doing, and certainly hope you have a great time. And we'll recap it all next week. Subscribe to the show. New episodes out each and every week. Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you're listening to podcasts. And we'll see you around the turn here on Let's Go Racing. We'll put the checker flag out on this edition of Let's Go Racing. Dominic Aragon, I'm Tyler Jones. Thanks so long. This has been another edition of Let's Go Racing.